Today we're talking about this one. Number 47, The Resistance. Now you may notice, right, that from now on in the UK, the books were published as double books. So not only is this one The Resistance, but it's also The Return. But today we're only focusing on the one with Jake and the Beaver on the front, The Resistance, and it's another Ellen Geroux one. Before I get into that, this afternoon, as of 3 hours after this video goes live, I'm doing my first live stream, my first Animorphs live stream. It's basically a tester episode to see how it goes, what with time zones and all that. So if you're interested in seeing me live, it's going to be a drinking game and we're going to be watching an Animorphs podcast. Come join me in 3 hours time on this channel, unless of course you've seen this after the stream started. I'll probably do more, maybe. But anyway, yeah, so The Resistance, book 47, another Jake narration, and it's written by Ellen Geroux. So, what have her previous books been? This is her last of 5 books. 33, 41, 43, 45, and now 47. So she's been busy lately, and she's had a bit of a mixed bag. Book 33, pretty crap. 41, excellent. Test, pretty good. And 45, crap. So yeah, definitely a mixed bag. And I've laid out what I believe her strengths and weaknesses are. Strengths, underlying messages, tone, character. That deep stuff that you don't see on the surface but works underneath the current. It's the undercurrent, essentially. And that came full force in book 41, which is why it's such an excellent book. Ellen Geroux's weakness, plot, plot, plot. Every time she has to tackle plot, she seems to struggle. What is this book? This book is very little plot and a lot of character introspection. So what do I end up thinking about this book? Be ready, because it's going back on the shelf and it's gonna fucking well stay there. This thing is goddamn poetry. Now, I don't want to spoil this review, even though I probably already have. This is Ellen Geroux's best work, and I say that without question, okay? It's not perfect. There are little bits that I found strange, but my God, this book was fantastic. There's nothing on my notes of anything I saw majorly wrong with it. There's only 3 notes, and it's just parts where I've been like, oh bloody hell, or how very interesting, or I wonder if ABC. It's great. There isn't much plot in this, which is good for Ellen Geroux. So doing my usual thing of running through the plot bit by bit probably won't be as effective. So I'll just outline the book for you. It's essentially almost like 2 books in one. You've got the one half, which revolves around the Hork-Bajir Valley. And then you've got the other half, which is a series of journal entries by a lieutenant, or lieutenant as I would say in this country, Lieutenant Isaiah Fitzhenry, who is the great-grandfather of Grandpa G, if I remember correctly. Remember Grandpa G from book 31? That was a good book as well. And it's all about Jake, who he looks up to and what's happened in the past. Himself as a leader, what sort of things he's influenced by as a leader. So it's nice to see that sort of returning here in a much bigger form. So let's cover the Isaiah Fitzhenry stuff first. So it's the Civil War, the American Civil War. And Isaiah Fitzhenry is a lieutenant. And they're in this little town in like mid-America or something like that. And they're in the midst of the Civil War, so all stuff is going on. And they're under threat from who they call the Rebs, the rebels, the Confederacy. They are expecting an imminent attack from a force much larger than their own. And their own men are stricken with disease and wounds. So they're only down to about 20, something like 25 able-bodied men. So they're in a really sticky situation. It's at this time when a group of, I believe it's about 30 slaves who are escaping, running away from the Confederacy, come down and find this little town. And Fitzhenry comes up with a guy called Rains, who's a bit more sceptical than he is. And they come up to these slaves and say, "What are you doing here?" And the slaves say, "We want to fight with you. We want to do our bit against the Confederacy." And there are a lot of people who object. I believe Rains objects at first as well. And Fitzhenry also says to them, "You can help us, but you will not fight." Okay? I wouldn't say he was the leader of the group of slaves, but he's almost like the spokesperson. A guy called Jacob. And he's the one who has the vast majority of the interactions with Fitzhenry. And he starts to talk to him about what he wants to do. The fact that they don't want to run away. They want to fight the rebels. They want to join this group. And so Fitzhenry starts seeing this as a positive. He says, right, we're really low on people. We could actually really do with the help. And though he may not at first want to give them weapons, he'll certainly use them to, say, dig a big trench, essentially, to aid them in their battle. Unfortunately, the townspeople aren't on side of this. Remember, this is like the mid-1800s in America, and there's some serious racism problems going on. And the townspeople, even though they're on the side of the Unionists, do not like the black people. And this it was Miller, his name was. He was one of the townspeople, one of the people who the Unionists met in this town where they're hunkered down. And he says, "We don't want to work with these people. We don't like the Negroes," as the book puts it. And it's because I don't know much about the history of America, whether the regular Unionist allies were like that. I imagine, because it's in the book, that there probably was. But that's the general feeling around the townspeople. Oh, we'll sort of tolerate them being over there, but we don't want them near us. Which is a horrible attitude, but it was common during that time. The next day, the first group of Rebs comes down, descends upon them, and Lieutenant Fitzhenry calls upon his men, "Right, get here, get out, sort yourselves out, and be ready to fire on my command." And the group of slaves who have been working to build this moat, and in fact given their own worthwhile suggestions, under the threat of a Scottish guy called Spears, who really isn't very nice to them. They're very sort of intertwined. What's the right word? They have a good working relationship with Fitzhenry, but not so much with the others, who tend to see them as almost lesser. I say almost lesser, they certainly do see them as lesser. But they're in the midst of this battle, right? And it's only a small group of rebels that comes towards them. And they start to fight them off. And a big scuffle. And the slaves get involved. And they start to help the Unionists in this fight. Lieutenant Fitzhenry gets shot. And he thinks he's in mortal danger. But it turns out, according to Miller, when he comes over to survey the damage, that it hit a belt buckle. So he didn't actually truly get shot. He just got the main impact, as it were. But he then says, "I've seen the black people fighting, and actually, I do now want to fight with them." So now there's unity in this big group. And they're allowed weapons, because at first, Miller and the other townspeople said, "We don't want them with weapons because they'll end up shooting us or robbing us and all that." But now they have weapons. And there's a brilliant, brilliant scene where Rains, almost the second in command to Lieutenant Fitzhenry, is getting a bit pussers, right? And he's seen this kid called Samson, who's very ill-disciplined, especially when it comes to military standards. He's sort of standing there a bit like that, not addressing people by rank and just generally interrupting officers. But Rains comes up to him and says, "Right, we're going to learn how to shoot a bloody weapon now, aren't we?" And shows him how to do it. And Samson, takes it on, loads his weapon, and bang, brilliant shot, knocks a tin can off the side. And then suddenly Rains comes in and just belts him with these orders. Quicker, faster, reload, fire. And Samson is just panicking like, fucking hell. And then Rains starts shooting above his head. And it's all about setting that fear into Samson to get him working faster and faster, better, more accurate. And I thought that was actually one of the better scenes in the book, and it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. The idea of fear being used to motivate. It's not a great concept, is it? But it's effective, and that's what works here. So they're instilling the fear into these people, saying this is the reality now. If you want to join us, this is how things are done. And eventually they're all shooting and they're getting good with their weaponry. And the day finally comes when the rebels come again, and they're more prepared this time. And Lieutenant Fitzhenry comes down, thinks he's ready, everyone's there, and then suddenly the battle erupts. And all these people we've been getting used to, these people that I've been interacting with in this side story, are getting blown up right, just bang, gone. And then the sad ending, when Jacob is shot, Fitzhenry is shot, and they fall down to die together. And the last entry in Fitzhenry's journal, which I imagine he must have just before he passed away, just wrote down, he says, "I hope I have done my best." That covers the plot, the second half of the plot. And that all comes from the journal that Jake finds in his basement. So at the very start of this book, there's a storm coming outside. There's a storm coming. And we know the metaphor that brings, right? Lovely metaphor. But his mother's like, we need to sort stuff out in the basement, get those boxes and do it. And she goes out. And Jake goes down into his basement. And he finds this box from Grandpa G that is being left to Jake eventually at some point. And in it, he finds Fitzhenry's journal as well as some of his equipment that he used. And Jake, of course, at some time, we don't know when exactly he read it, but he reads this book. I suspect, personally, he might have read it after the events of this book. I suspect. I could be wrong. These first couple of scenes, especially in the first chapter, are fantastic. Very subtle, which is what I think Ellen Geroux is best at. These subtle moments with metaphor, underlying stuff thrown in there. Stuff that you have to think twice about. I don't like things being given to me, handed to me on a plate. It's like when you're at a zoo, right? When they feed big animals at the zoo, like you've got a lion. They don't, because what they do at the zoo I worked at, they've got these big places at the back, the animal goes in there and they shut the gate, and then you get the workers coming in and placing food in there. What they don't do is they don't place the food right in front of the door, so the lion or tiger or whatever comes out and, oh, there's the food. What they always used to do was put it somewhere where it's either hidden or it's harder to get to, whether it be in a big cardboard box that's filled with hay and the food is hidden somewhere in there, hidden, because where I worked, the lions had like a big old Land Rover that was in there and they put it inside there. Or sometimes they'd even chain food high up into a tree so the animal has to climb up. Stimulation gets them moving, gets them thinking. And much like the lions prefer that, I prefer a book that gets me thinking beneath the surface. And that is what Ellen Geroux is good at, and that is what she does here in these... So throughout this book, I'm not going to say it's just the first few scenes, it's throughout the book. There's this storm coming, and we all know what that's a metaphor for. It's the end of the series, this big storm cloud descending upon them, descending upon Jake's house, which is, as from what I can see about the metaphor, is a metaphor of himself. He is the house, this cosy little place that he's known for so long. Suddenly the storm is coming over it, descending upon him specifically. And he goes down to this basement and suddenly, crash, bang, a bit like a tree comes through, or something smashes through the basement window, and the the storm starts barreling in through, and he eventually manages to fix it up with cardboard and the like. And if you were just looking at a surface level of this book, you'd think, well, that didn't really do anything. But what I believe this is, it's a message that's under everything else going through this book. Jake is losing control. Remember, the last few books, stretching all the way back to book 41. It's all about Jake, who's established himself now as the leader of the group, who sees himself as in charge. He's the one that makes the decisions. He is the one that is guiding things. That is starting to fall away. We saw it in the dream in 41, where he's seeing the outcomes of things that he can't control, can't change, and how that distresses him. Book 43 with Tobias, where Cassie just pulls herself out of the mission, doesn't want to do it anymore. Book 44 as well, with the stuff that happened with Cassie. Book 45, where Marco makes the decision to save his father and in turn make Marco have to go into hiding, making an inconvenience for Jake. And 46, the big one, the Axe Betrayal. Now, one of the things that I said before doing this was, I hope to God that this book addresses the Axe Betrayal, because if it doesn't, then that's a serious negative for this book. It did address it, but not in the way I expected, and actually that made me quite pleased. So that big betrayal of Axe at the end, knocking Jake unconscious, okay? Jake feels he's losing control of everything around him. The storm cloud of this war is coming over and is starting to smash the foundations of this house that is him and his control of the situation. It's starting to come in and ruin things, starting to pull everything apart. The end of book 46, where you have that big battle, and suddenly everything they've learned, everything they've done goes out of the window, and Jake loses all control. That is what Jake is worried about. And so what happens regarding Axe and his betrayal? Well, Jake sees it as, that's a serious problem. I'm losing control of Axe. How do I address this situation? From what's given in here, my conclusion is this. He knows that he should chastise Axe, but he knows that if he does, he may lose control entirely of Axe, and the whole group might split. So what's Jake's choice here? It's a catch-22. Does he let this act of betrayal go unpunished, or does he risk the entire dissolving of the group? What a bloody awful decision. So what he basically just lets Axe off the hook. Just almost reset, restart. That was the situation. Let's pretend it never happened. Axe can't. And there's a few little hints in this book where he can't even look at Jake. He doesn't look at Jake. He doesn't speak with the same gusto as he would before. And I love it. It's so underplayed, but it's still there. It's just a little tension beneath everything, and it is beautifully done. That little tension beneath it all. Love it. And then there's, so it was still in the basement, right? And he's found this book, and then suddenly somebody turns up in the house. The electricity's gone out because of this storm. Again, Jake losing control. He can't control what's happening around him. And he goes upstairs thinking it's his mother returning with Homer. Turns out it's Tom, who's just sort of stood there, distant, far away. And this is incredibly interesting to me. This part here. So this is before even the window comes crashing through, and he's in charge of distributing things into various boxes for his mother's task. I tripped over a pile of loose papers, numbers, columns of figures, the words mutual fund allocation. I threw the papers in one of the empty boxes, labelled it Mum's stuff. I grabbed another stack of papers off the floor. At the top of the page, a kid had scrawled, "What I did this summer." In the corner were the stamped words, "Good job." Tom's old schoolwork, from before he became a controller. I threw the stack into another box and started to write his name on the lid. Stopped and crossed it out. Printed, "Trash. I didn't have a brother anymore." Ooh, shit. I didn't have a brother anymore. This was the reason Jake was doing this all from the start, to save Tom. He jumped Visser 3 as a tiger at the end of book 1 because of Tom. And gradually over the course of the series, it's been getting more distant from him. It's less of his priority. And now we get to this book. He doesn't have a brother anymore. He's completely lost hope of finding or rescuing Tom. Maybe not so much rescuing Tom, but it's the idea that he knows that is no longer his priority. And we see a brilliant metaphor for that later in the book, so we will come back to this. The other content of this book revolves pretty much entirely around the Hork-Bajir colony. So Cassie calls up Jake and says, we've got trouble. Obviously, the Hork-Bajir have once again come to Cassie's house, which is the beginnings of another theory in itself, but that's for an entirely different video. The Hork-Bajir have talked to Cassie and said, we've got problems. I mean, it could have been Tobias, but the Hork-Bajir are always seen around Cassie. The Hork-Bajir know where Cassie lives, and she's the one calling up, so I'm jumping to that conclusion. I think there's a lot of reasonable logic behind it. Again, that's for another video. It turns out something has gone very, very wrong. And Jake flies out to the Hork-Bajir Valley. All the other Animorphs are already there. And Toby comes up and says, in one of our raids, we rescued 4 people, but one of our own was captured. Oh shit. One of the only flaws I found, well, not so much a flaw, but something that puzzles me in this book. If a Hork-Bajir from the valley has been captured, then surely now the Yeerks know the identity, or the identities, of the Animorphs. Because as we all know, at least the founding Hork-Bajir of this colony know that they're humans. I'm sure that the Hork-Bajir, when they're sitting around their campfires at night, tell stories and talk about what goes on with the Animorphs, and her name's Cassie and Axe and Marco. So I may be jumping to conclusions, but I'm pretty sure that this captured Hork-Bajir would probably know who the Animorphs are. There's only one thing that I can say probably makes sense here. And that is that no Yeerk ever has the stomach to say to Visser 3, or now Visser 1, excuse me, sir, they're actually... Just off goes the head. And, I mean, all the way back to book 4, the Yeerks have been suspecting, we think these are actually humans. So this has probably been going on for a while. All the Yeerks probably know by this point, and Visser 1 is the only person who has no bloody idea that these are actually humans. So I suppose that makes sense. The only way that Visser 1 would accept that these are humans is if he saw it with his own eyes. So, yeah, I suppose looking at it from that angle, it makes sense that this Hork-Bajir gets taken, but Visser 1 doesn't believe at this point that they're humans. So, even one of the only flaws in this book I find, there's a reasonable explanation as to why it's not a flaw. Fuck me, this book is good. It does mean, however, that the Yeerks now know where the Hork-Bajir Valley is. And even though it's usually pretty impossible to get to, having a Hork-Bajir who knows how to get back there, the Yeerks will be able to get in. Big problem. And now the Animorphs know they're coming for this valley. What do we do? This is where I believe Jake's fears of a lack of control come into play once again. He says to the Hork-Bajir, you've got to get out of here. You will lose this battle, you will die, or you will be infested. So, he goes up into a tree and says, this is what we do. If you want to stay alive, you come stand over here. If you want to die, go stand with Toby, who's determined to stay there and fight to protect it's not technically their land, but the land that they're living on. And the Hork-Bajir hesitate, think about it, and then go to stand with Toby. Jake has no control over this group. Another little stab at his idea of leadership. He has no control over these people. There's a little hint, I believe, as to why this is the case, especially regarding the Hork-Bajir. Because Jake is planning. He's got this map he's drawn out in the sand with a stick. And the Animorphs and Toby Hammy are there talking about it. And Toby pulls him aside and just says to Jake, look, you don't give the Hork-Bajir the credit that they deserve. They do a lot more than you think they do. And that tells me that the Hork-Bajir don't have the respect for Jake because Jake doesn't have the respect for them. He doesn't think that they're doing anything. He thinks that they're just blindly following Toby Hammy no matter what she does. And Toby Hammy comes up and says, no, actually, they do put a lot of thought into this. They put a lot of energy into what they're doing and they risk themselves for this. But Jake doesn't seem to see that. He thinks he can just turn up and say, follow me, I'm your leader. But they won't do that. They won't do that, even though this guy, largely Tobias, but by extension Jake, saved the Hork-Bajir and started this free colony. They won't do that. Why? Because Jake doesn't offer them the respect and he doesn't give them credit for what they do. This comes down to Jake's failing leadership. And that's what he knows. He knows that he's failed in this regard. He knows he's failed with Axe. He knows he failed with Cassie. He knows he failed with Marco. Everything around him. The storm is coming and it's battering his house down. He is failing and he is panicking. He is losing control. So what does Jake do? Does he leg it and say, okay, you're on your own? No. Despite the protests of Marco, and probably Axe as well. You probably know he would... No, because he never says anything. So probably mostly Marco. They would say, we have no reason to be here. This isn't our home. This is their battle. It's their fault they got into this mess. We should stand back and preserve ourselves rather than throw ourselves into a suicidal battle. Why does Jake say, we're going to stay? Why? Because he wants to earn that respect that he's lost. And why does he want to earn back that respect? To gain control. The Hork-Bajir are a pawn in this war. The Chi are a pawn in this war. Each of the other 5 Animorphs are pawns in this war. And every pawn he has is important to his final battle plan. So if those Hork-Bajir were to go away on their own, he's got one less pawn to operate with. One less throw of that dice. He needs that. He needs everything he can. And this reflects back into the Isaiah Fitzhenry story. When the slaves came down from the hill and said they wanted weapons, at first he says, we won't give you weapons. But eventually he relented and said, actually, yes. Why did he do that? He was low on personnel. Did he say, come along, slaves, and join our forces because of altruism? No, it was not altruism. It was convenience for him because he knew that he was in a losing position and he would take anything he could to make sure that they had just that little bit more of a chance. And this comes down to a big question of altruism. What is altruism? Is altruism an actual thing? Is every good thing we do, in a way, meant to benefit us back? Because that's what Isaiah Fitzhenry did. And yeah, a lot of it seems like genuine altruism. He had empathy for these people, and he lent them a helping hand, and he showed them how to fight, and he allowed them to continue to fight alongside him. Why did he do it? Because it helped him. Why is Jake in this position now where he's saying, we will help the Hork-Bajir out? Because they're a pawn here, and he needs them. If the Animorphs stay and help out the Hork-Bajir, if the Hork-Bajir somehow survive this battle, he will have them. The Animorphs will have helped them not only to escape the Yeerks, but will have helped them to preserve themselves further, to help protect their home. That's a bargaining chip. And I hate to talk about Jake in this sort of light, but that's the message I'm getting from this book, reflected in the Isaiah Fitzhenry stuff. It's all about winning. All about winning. There may be some altruism in there, but that altruism is born of that desire to win. But there's also one other thing that I think brings about this decision. And whether this is a larger part of it or a smaller part, it's all about his ego, his pride. Because you remember that line at the end from Isaiah Fitzhenry, I hope I did my best. Jake is looking up to this sort of person. He looks at leaders. We've seen that from book 31. He's ever since he got into this idea of being a leader, he's looked up at previous leaders and looked how they've done things. And to see how they've gone about doing their best and in some way doing the right thing. How would Jake see himself as a leader if he just abandoned the Hork-Bajir that they've worked hard to protect and who on their own have worked so hard to protect themselves as well? He would be losing something precious, and he doesn't want to do that. So all this has come together, and Jake is going to fight this battle despite logic saying he shouldn't. And then you wonder why the Hork-Bajir want to fight this battle, because they could leg it and live. Why don't they? Do you remember book 13 and book 23? Free or dead. That's the Hork-Bajir motto, as it were. Free or dead. There is no in-between. Freedom or nothing. Why are they fighting this battle? Because they don't want to hide. They don't want safety. Because safety isn't freedom. And they want to earn that freedom. They would rather die than be granted this pseudo-safety. They want to earn their freedom. It's something unfortunately, we see in the modern world. People are too eager to give up their freedom for a bit of safety. Oh, it's okay if we give up our freedoms because now we're safe. We're not going to get harmed. I don't agree with that, out of principle. And it seems the Hork-Bajir don't either. They don't want the safety. Fuck safety. We want freedom. And that's what they're fighting for. They're going to stand their ground and say, you will not put us into hiding. We will not hide forever. What happens next is the Animorphs start to plan what to do. And they basically do a scout of the area. It turns out there's a bunch of campers down at the south where they believe the Yeerks will be coming from. So the Yeerks coming from the south. And they travel north and there's a dam, or a big lake and a pond and what have you. And there are beavers there. And I believe it is Jake who comes up with an idea. They'll flood the Yeerks out. Because there's all this water, and he sees the beavers stacking this stuff up, preparing, getting ready. He says, right, what we'll do, we'll flood them out. Good plan. So they get to work with that. They make preparations. And this is one of the first time we get actually quite in-depth pre-mission prep from Jake and the team. And it was delicious. Delicious. I love it. Seeing Jake in that sort of role. Jake and Tobias then go off to find these campers. And Tobias morphs human, Jake's human as well. And they come up to this bunch of tents. There's about 15 or so people. And they say, you got to fuck off, right? Because there's COVID in the area. Ugh! And the campers are like, nah, mate, we got vaccinated. And so Jake and Tobias say, fuck off. Fuck off. But no, they refuse to. So Jake and Tobias decide, we got to do it. And they start to morph and then demorph and all that sort of stuff. And the campers are just like, what the fuck? But it turns out they're Trekkies. And this part of the book was just slightly jarring at first. It got better later on, but the very start of it was just jarring, where it's been a very serious book, and then suddenly we stand alongside the Federation or whatever the hell it was. I don't watch Star Trek. Never have, actually. I don't think I've ever watched a single episode of Star Trek, would you believe? But whatever. And they're like, yeah, we'll join you and we'll fight with the good aliens to send away the bad aliens. Tobias is immediately like, oh, Jake, what the fuck have we done? A couple of the campers leave, but the rest of them join Jake and Tobias, go back to the camp and meet the Hork-Bajir, who are just sort of like, hello. The campers like, what the fuck is going on here? But they still don't get it. They still don't get it. And then we get to the final preparations for the battle. And there's like a production line. And Jake and the other animals are seeing these Hork-Bajir, like whittling sticks, carving down spears and sticking it together, making big battle platforms and just this large production line. The campers are joining in, including the father Richard Carpenter. And then the day of the battle comes. And the mist descends. The setting of the scene was pretty damn good in this. And there's the quiet before the battle. And Richard comes up to Jake as everything's about to kick off and everyone's in position. He says, what's all this about? Jake says, you might die. And he's like, what? You were saying we might actually die? And he starts freaking out and eventually once he legs it basically. And we'll talk about this later. The battle starts and there are Hork-Bajir dying everywhere. This big battle, what Jake refers to as a sad civil war, which again is a nice parallel to the Isaiah Fitzgerald. Is it Fitzgerald or Fitzhenry? Yeah, it is Fitzhenry. Why was I thinking Fitzgerald? Silly me. But yeah, it's a parallel to that. And the Hork-Bajir think they've won at first because the original Hork-Bajir retreat. And then the Visser comes. And things start getting... all the trees in the area are getting blasted. Just blown apart. And Hork-Bajir falling and screaming and crying. And Jake is wondering, what the fuck do we do here? It becomes desperate. And he's trying to call out, open the dam, open the dam. And he thinks all hope is gone. Visser 3 has arrived in his 8-headed, 8-legged monstrosity. The same one that he morphed in the Yerk back in book 1. This is important. And it was actually pointed out in the book. The last time we saw this morph was on the first time we met. And Jake is in Tiger Morph. Visser 3's coming up. He's going wild, blowing up trees and all that. And Jake just his mind just isn't focusing properly. And all this is coming together. And he lunges for Visser 3 and starts biting futilely into this monstrosity. And he thinks he's about to die when the Visser clobbers him and lifts him up. But then the water finally descends and washes through the valley, taking the Visser with it. Jake manages to escape this as the Visser goes off. And Jake pulls himself back to the valley where the battle has ended. Why is this important? It's yet another parallel. Book 1. Visser 3 morphs the same monster in the Yerk pool. And he begins to attack, or Tom begins to attack this morph. So Jake thinks, I've got to save Tom. And as he, in his tiger morph, he jumps this monster and starts biting. Of course, it's a losing battle, but he eventually gets away. In this book, Visser 1 is there attacking everything. And in that moment, Jake feels the need to protect and lunges for Visser 3. A direct parallel. Why? Why? I said we'd bring Tom back into this. In book 1, it was to protect Tom. Book 47, we've established his brother's gone. He's not protecting Tom. What is it he is protecting? The same things that have motivated him throughout all the other parts of this book. His desire for control, the fact that he's losing that control, his fear of losing his pride, his dignity, maintaining the war effort and holding on to every pawn he has. The 3 things that he's now protecting, that's what's causing him to lunge at Visser 1 here. Whew! There's a strange little bit here, and it's one of the other little bits, it's one of those bits that confused me a bit. Because Rachel sort of uncovers a baby Hork-Bajir who she's protected once the battle's over. And it's Toby's younger brother. Now, this seems strange to me because it just pops up out of nowhere. He was never introduced. He's never before this point been mentioned until now, where it says Rachel had protected and saved Toby's younger brother. And I'm thinking, who? Where did he come from? Where? Why is he now being introduced? And I can't figure out for the life of me why. Why is there a younger brother? Maybe it's just a little detail they thought to add in, but it just seems strange that this whole new character is suddenly just there. And Ellen Geroux, the way she writes, I just think she's got a reason for Toby having a younger brother being there and being protected. I can't figure it out, honestly. By the way, in my favourite Animorphs fan fiction, The Earth Diary of Toby Hammy, Toby's brother's name is Dude, named after Tobias's cat. Yeah, I love that fanfic, it's great. So the battle has ended and they mourn the dead, but they have to move out quickly because they know that the Urks will probably come back. And Toby, obviously, having seen the state that the valley is now in, they can't live there. The word sort of slipped out of my head there. She knows this place is destroyed, we have to move back, but we protected it, we earned this, and someday maybe we'll return. Is that a subtle hint of maybe someday they'll return back to their home planet? Is that she's playing around with that? Hard to say. But she's more hopeful, and there's a nice little back and forth with her and Jake at this part. And it's fantastic. And the book ends with Jake reading that last entry in Fitzhenry's journal. As he says, "I hope I did my best." And Jake thinks to himself, I wonder what my last lines will be. Ooh, this book, man. Fucking poetry. I'm amazed at how good this book is. Absolutely amazed. Let's cover another couple of things, because there is so much here. So much that I probably won't get around to mention it all, because there's so much in my head. Right, yeah, a couple of things. The campers. How did they get there? Because we know from the way that this valley is set up that it's basically impossible to get into unless you know where it is. How did the campers get into the valley? Was it a plot hole? Is it an oversight? Or was it an Ellimist trick? Or something else? Because as soon as they come back and Jake comes up to Toby and she has a bunch of Hork-Bajir waiting there for these campers to come in, so that the campers walk in. And Jake says to Toby, "How the hell did you know that we were coming?" And she says, "I know many things. The trees have been whispering to me. I see many things." And I'm thinking, is that the Ellimist? But is it? Is it? Because surely Toby knows about the Ellimist. You'd think that the Ellimist playing a big part in Jarrett and Ket's rescue, that they would know about the Ellimist, that maybe Tobias or Cassie would have mentioned him in passing. Maybe they didn't. I don't think that's the sort of thing you should hold back from the Hork-Bajir who you've just saved, but maybe they didn't. And if they did, why doesn't Toby make that connection of this? I'm hearing whispers through the trees. Maybe it's the Ellimist. Maybe it's something else. We don't know. We really don't know. But again, that's a mystery for another video. The whole idea of parallels in this book. Why is the Fitzhenry stuff in here? I think the stories work so well in tandem. Very different situations. You've got the American Civil War and then you've got a freaking alien invasion in California. And but there are so many parallels. And throughout this book, I was thinking which group is a metaphor for the other, or which group is analogous to the other. You've got Lieutenant Fitzhenry and his group. You've got the townspeople, and you've got the slaves, and you've got the rebels. That's 4 distinct groups there. Now, on the surface, you'd say, right, so the Animorphs are the Unionists, the townspeople are the regular people out there, the slaves are the Hork-Bajir, and the rebels are the Yeerks. And job done. That's what you'd think on the surface. But is it really? Is it true and not true? Now, what do I mean by that? At first, I was thinking, yeah, the slaves are clearly analogous to the Hork-Bajir. But then the campers came along. Why are the campers in this book? A number of reasons, probably. I don't know. But I've got my suspicions. A little group that just turn up out of nowhere and say, we'll help you. We will fight. And they come in completely untrained, don't really know what they're doing, and they're suddenly panicked into, like Samson with being trained with a gun, they're panicked into fighting, and they go through with it. And Richard Carpenter, in the end, lost his life, much like Jacob and Samson. So I thought, are the slaves parallel to the campers? They are in some ways, but they're also parallel to the Hork-Bajir in other ways. Who are the Animorphs? Because the Animorphs have a bit... they're a bit like the slaves in ways as well. Because the Unionists are the ones protecting the land, which is the Hork-Bajir, and the Animorphs have come in out of nowhere saying, we'll fight with you. And I'm thinking, they're like pseudo-parallels. It's weird, but it just fits. It fits. I don't get it, but I love it. And then, of course, you've got the townspeople, who are probably analogous to, your general population. There's a talk in this book about what do we do with the Hork-Bajir after all is said and done. Marco says something about, you just imagine Toby being a soccer mum and Hork-Bajir just living in a neighbourhood next to humans. And Toby's obviously a bit like, humans can be a bit intolerant. Yeah, Marco just says, it's probably best after all is said and done to just stay away from us because we're not very tolerant. Then you get the parallel with, I think it was Joe Miller, the guy in the Fitzhenry story. Even though allied with this group of black slaves that have come in, he says, I don't want anything to do with them. No, don't want them near me. But what happened after that? They united. When Joe Miller saw the slaves fighting alongside the Unionists, joining in the fight, he said, actually, come join us. Is that another thing that Toby wants for her people? Why she's fighting this war? What will the humans think of the Hork-Bajir if all the war ends and they find these Hork-Bajir? What did you do during the war? We ran away from the Yeerks. Okay. How do we trust you then? Or, what did you do during the war? We lost many people fighting to protect the small bit of land that we had. You're on our side. It's so many little parallels here, and I love it. I've said that enough, but fuck me, this is good. And I think my last point, why were the campers there in this story? I think a lot of it is almost like a tester for the Animorphs. What will it be like if we reveal the invasion to your average Joe Bob down the street? And we got a mixed number of reactions. We got the ones that just walked off straight away, fuck it, I'm not having anything to do with this. You've got a few of the kids who were into it, and they got there and they joined the fight, no questions asked. And then you have Richard Carpenter, the father, who at first is like, yeah, this is cool, I'm going to join in. And then when it comes down to that last little bit, he says, oh shit, actually, I'm going to walk away now. And the strange bit about that is he dies. He's from what we know, could be wrong, because a lot of the campers weren't really mentioned at all, but he's the only one we know of that died. And he'd run back to the rock for safety. But he died. How did that happen? Sometimes running for safety ain't no safety at all. There's probably a lot more that I wanted to cover. I had a big discussion with Raptor yesterday. I just had to talk to him. I called him up and said, right, I need to talk about this book with you. There's so much stuff to get into. And yeah, I think I've covered most of the stuff I want to cover. I would love to go into more detail, but I'll probably just end up repeating myself more than I probably already have. This book is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Where can I put this book where it's higher up? Put it there. You're higher up now. It's the first book that I've deliberately made. It could well be my favourite of the series. And I wasn't expecting it, because everyone always says, oh, book 47, it's half a book. You just skip the Isaiah Fitzhenry chapters. But if you do that, you're missing just this juicy little thing going on there in the background. And all this comes down to Jake. All comes down to his lack of control. And it's fucking juicy. What do I make of his leadership? Well, big question. Big question. He did pretty good. He came up with the beaver dam idea. He positioned everyone, but for the large part, he left it to Toby to organise her people. He organised the Animorphs. He revealed himself to the campers, which was a risk, but one that, in the end, did it pay out? It was neither. You could say that the humans helped in the war, but you'd probably say they probably didn't make that much of a difference. Let's be honest. But it didn't turn out bad. It got the humans out of the way, so they actually, getting them out of the way, in the way he did, helped them survive, or the majority of them anyway. But he didn't make any absolutely outstanding decisions. I think his failures regarding the Hork-Bajir have been exposed in the fact that he doesn't give them the respect that they deserve, and the Hork-Bajir have seen that, and so they don't give him that respect back. But that's in the stories leading up to this, not specifically in the book itself. I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. A steady 7. Nothing outstanding, but nothing bad. And I think the positives outweigh the negatives. So I think a 7 out of 10 is a reasonable score. There's no question about the score for the book overall. It's a 10 out of 10. I don't even think I need to explain that to you. I can't find any outstanding flaws in this. Any flaws that I do pick up can be explained. And like Toby Hammy's younger brother, there may be something that Ellen Geroux's doing in the background. It's very much the same as 41, where I finished the book and I think about it and I've still got these unanswered questions that I know the answers are somewhere. I just need to think and get it. I need to be that lion crawling up into the tree to get his food at the zoo, pulling it off the chain and ripping it off, eventually getting what he wants. Oh, what a book. What a book. Brilliant. Next up, in the same physical book, but a different book entirely, is The Return. We've had 3 really shit Rachel books in a row. Her character has been stagnant since 22, 27. Over half the series ago. This book, this is the last Rachel book. It needs to be good. It needs to be good, or else, as far as I'm concerned, the Rachel character has been a disappointment. So I hope that the next one is as... Well, to say it would be as good as this one would be probably asking a bit much, but I'm hoping it's good. Ellen Geroux, your last ghostwritten book, fucking brilliant. Absolutely top notch. And I'm a very, very happy Animorphs fan. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next week, or hopefully in a few hours for the live stream. Thank you very much for watching. Ta-ra.